And welcome to episode 9 of the Truth in the Arena podcast, where we are speaking to coaches and high performance professionals about the values, principles, and the why that brings them out to the field every single day. And at some point, we usually transition our conversation to some of their social and political perspectives and their insight on current events and the news of the day. So, we are very happy to have as our guest today Coach Tyler Germain. Tyler has recently crossed the 20-year barrier as a track and field coach. He's a coach at Kalamazoo Central High School in Michigan. He is also a teacher there and also a writer who is the author of several of the most popular articles on the Simply Faster website. Tyler, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks, Nate, for having me. Really appreciate it.
No, very much looking forward to the conversation. And as I mentioned, have over 20 years of coaching experience. You're in the teaching profession. Both of those tend to be kind of high burnout type of fields. And so people involved really need to have that why that gets them out of bed each day and out working with the kids. So can you talk just a little bit about the motivating principles and values that drive you to do the job that you do each day and the principles and values you're most looking to instill in the kids that you teach and the athletes that you coach?
Yeah, I mean, 20 years is, it's kind of hard to believe, actually. This past season was actually my 21st season coaching track and field, which is more than half my life, which is kind of like when you start putting it into those terms, it's like kind of crazy. Like, for some people, 20 years is a career, but I feel like I still have a lot of years left in the tank and kind of feel like I'm just getting started here at Kalamazoo Central, and that we have a lot more that we can still accomplish in our school. And so I think in the last 5 years, I've felt even more energized than I maybe ever have at any point in my career. But I think one of the things that has really contributed to my longevity in this sport is kind of recognizing the importance of mentorship. And, my track coaches changed my life and also became my mentors. And I've had lots of other mentors that I've met along the way in coaching and in teaching and just in life who have sort of helped me to shape my worldview and my own approach to coaching. And to kind of get to your question, I recognize that my role as a coach is not just about like training kids to run fast, but also to try to be a mentor in some ways. And I do think that sports lend themselves to opening conversations about like life lessons, right? Like commitment and teamwork and overcoming adversity and contributing to something larger than ourselves and working toward a goal and handling failure and disappointment and all these things that come with being involved in a sport and being involved with a team. And so I try to just take opportunities to talk about those kinds of things whenever I can and try to help kids build the tools that they need to not only navigate, our sport and our season, but hopefully also life as well. As far as core values, I really believe in the importance of equity and access when it comes to building a thriving community. And I think that when society becomes more equitable and more accessible, it means that more people are able to participate more fully in that community. And I think that should be the goal for every community, to invite more people in, right? So when I think about that and how it connects to my approach to coaching, I think my views are pretty similar. Like in our school, I want to make our team not just highly competitive, which I do want it to be, right? But also an inviting and inclusive and welcoming group so that more kids in our school have the opportunity to participate in a thriving community, that being our team. And I think we're doing that. I mean, we ended up with a little over 160 athletes on our team this year, and I coach both the boys and the girls, so that's a combined number. But that's over 10% of our student body. It's more than double the number of kids that we had on the team my first year as head coach 5 years ago. And I feel proud of the fact that we've built a team and a community that kids in our school want to be a part of.
That's just an amazing number in and of itself. 10% of the student body wanting to participate in any single sport. So that's a huge number, and that speaks to the type of community that you're creating. And when you talk about things that matter to you, and you talk about mentors, part of mentorship is also serving as a role model. And you talk again about wanting to be that inviting and trying to be as equitable as possible. So, kind of flipping that initial question to a certain degree, how do those core values that you've just discussed in terms of how you approach coaching, how do those also then translate to what you're looking for in terms of political leadership at either the community, the state, or the national level?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if I can sum up my approach to coaching as inviting people in, building people up, and trying to create an environment in which people can thrive, I think there's probably a pretty direct line for me, anyway, for the types of leadership and policy that I would like to see at the local level, the state level, the national level. Unfortunately, it seems like our current national regime, at least, doesn't seem super interested in that. At least from where I'm sitting, it doesn't seem that way. There's a lot of focus on keeping people out or even kicking people out, holding others down, creating environments that are hostile towards a lot of people. And that just makes no sense to me. I don't think that the way that you demonstrate and hold on to power is to stand on the neck of somebody else who doesn't have it. And it just really seems like that is the direction that we are heading at the national level right now. But in my view, a community at large is not better when we make it impossible for everyone to participate and to thrive in it. And so, you know, politically speaking and sort of philosophically speaking, a couple things that I believe to be true are that one, in a high functioning democracy, one person or one group's success shouldn't come at the expense of another. And if we think of barriers in society as sort of the line between struggling and thriving, then to me, it's to everybody's benefit to get as many people on the thriving side of that barrier as possible. And frankly, even better would be to remove the barrier entirely. Because why wouldn't we want to live in a world where more people are thriving and fewer people are struggling? That it just doesn't make sense to me. But not everybody seems to share that view. And some people are like, well, I'm thriving, I'm good, so like forget about whoever else. But I just really think like you don't like close the door behind you on your way through, like hold the door open for somebody else kind of thing. So like to tie that back to coaching, I see a lot of similarities too. When we create a space where even the least experienced kid can thrive, it doesn't just benefit that inexperienced kid. Everyone benefits from that kind of environment. And the kids who are more experienced and more talented also see that the team is for everybody, right? And that all success is celebrated. I think about like maybe a silly analogy, but like something as simple as like a wheelchair ramp to get into a building, right? Like I can use the staircase. A person who's not as able-bodied in the same way as I am can't use the staircase. Okay, we can both use the ramp, right? So making it more accessible for one person does not harm somebody else, and in fact is probably better because now both of those voices are in the room and in the building, right? So I think in that sense, we try to point out the fact that like our team doesn't just get better when our state champ PRs, right? Our team gets better when anybody on the team gets better, right? It improves the overall quality of our team, and our team gets closer to thriving when we have more and more people who are sort of on that pathway too. So I think we just try to preach that it's like kind of in everybody's best interest, from our coaching staff to our upperclassmen to the first time kid on our team, to work together and try to bring as many people moving forward as possible and not leave anybody behind.
No, super, super important point that you make there relative to both track and field and life is that one person's success doesn't necessarily exclude somebody else. And I've heard you talk about it in other occasions where, someone can win a 100-meter race, but that doesn't prevent somebody else from setting their own PR in that exact same race. It does not exclude somebody else's success. And track and field, like swimming and some other stopwatch sports, are truly a meritocracy in that way, where it doesn't come down to somebody's opinion. It doesn't come down to somebody's decision making. What you get as your time or your height or your distance are what you get. And it is really the ultimate meritocracy in that way. Yet, there's also more to it. So can you dive even deeper into something that you've already elaborated on a little bit, but how do you balance coaching and teaching for those who really are competing at the very, very highest peer level, and they are trying to beat the best in the state in their event, and also creating this incredible environment for those who may not be competing for the wins, but they're competing against themselves. They're competing to show that they can help boost the team's points, and they're competing because it's just a good thing for somebody that age to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And real quick, the thing you were mentioning at the beginning, like that is one of the things that I love most about track, right? Is like there's no defense.
Right.
Which is a phrase that I use a lot. Like, there's literally nothing I can do about the lane next to me on this side, or the lane next to me on this side, or any of the other 8 lanes. So I just got to kind of do my thing. And a quick story, which is not something I wrote down, but I think it fits in with this conversation. So, we just graduated an incredible sprinter, one of the fastest kids ever in the history of the state of Michigan. And he's going to go run at Michigan State on scholarship next year. But last year, as a junior, Jeremy won the 100-meter dash at our state championship, and it was kind of a shitty day. Like, we had like 55 and like windy and rainy at our state meet last year, but he won the 100 he ran 10:72. And won the 100 into a headwind last year. This year at state finals, he ran 10:45 in the 100, which broke the previous Division I state meet record. Trouble is, he finished third. So he ran 10:45 and finished third. The other 2 people that beat him also broke the previous Division I state meet record. So it's just one of those things, like, you can go have an unprecedented day, right? And still not have, a gold medal to show for it, but certainly still a huge improvement in your time to show for it. That was a huge PR for him. And likewise, like 10:72 doesn't win a lot of state meets, especially once you get out of the Midwest, right? But it did last year. So you can run okay and still win, or you can run great and not win. And it's just, it's just kind of the nature of it. But anyway, that was a digression. But to kind of get to your question, I mean, yeah, there is something really pure about the stopwatch, isn't there? Like,
Absolutely.
It tells no lies. Or about the idea of 2 people just like lining up to race and saying, okay, let's go. We're going to find out, right? Who's fastest. And I think that is, those types of sports to me are the purest types of sports, or the purest types of competition, because there are so many fewer outside factors involved, right? It's something that football, basketball, baseball, other team sports don't really have. the best team doesn't always win on a given day. There are gazillion factors that could lead to that outcome. It's probably why there's like 75 different shows that talk about with talking heads that argue about what happened in a football game, and I'm pretty sure that there are zero about track and field. The fastest person wins, the highest jump wins, the farthest throw wins, which is pretty cool, but it doesn't leave a lot of room for entertaining like TV debates. So, but you're right. Like when you have a team of 160 athletes, the vast majority of them are not what we would consider to be elite, right? We do have some kids who are tremendous, like the one I just mentioned, who is one of the fastest kids ever in the history of the state. And we've had, several others on our team who have we've broken school records, like I forget, upwards of 40 times in the last like 5 years and all this kind of thing. But like that's not the majority of our kids, right? It's and many of our kids may never score a point or may never win a race. And so while I do believe it's important that we remain highly competitive and that we continue to sort of raise that ceiling on our very best kids at the conference level, the regional level, the state level, even the national level, that can't be our only measure of success as a program and as a community, to bring that idea back, right? Like, because if it is, then every year we're going to have about 130 athletes who feel like they've failed somehow. And that's just not true. So, we've talked about winning, and you in your question mentioned like kind of the idea of pursuing excellence across the board, not just with your sort of elite athletes. So I think the way that I try to include everyone in that pursuit of excellence is to define those terms in ways that make it so that everyone can find a way to win. Like winning doesn't have to necessarily mean, it doesn't literally mean a gold medal or a first place trophy if we are thinking about it in different terms or defining it in different ways. So with, 17 different events and 160 different skill sets and experience levels, you can actually find wins all over the place if you are looking for them. And then once you start looking for them, they start popping up all over the place, and then you can celebrate those wins. So, like PRs are an obvious one, right? You performed better than you ever did before, so that's a win. You ran your first hurdle race and you 5-stepped it and barely made it through, and then a few weeks later you've learned how to alternate, and now you're taking 4 steps between the hurdles, and maybe by the end of the season you were able to like 3-step a couple before you had to switch to 4, and then you come back to next year and now you figure out how to 3-step the whole race. Like every single one of those steps in the progression is a win, right? Because it's a move forward toward like, and just like getting better. And even things like, oh, you ran this workout at the start of the year and you barely made it through it before you barfed on the football field, and look now, it's the middle of May and you crushed the same workout. We did the same workout and you absolutely crushed it. Like that's a win. Look at how much better you've gotten. Look at how much stronger you've gotten. You were ineligible 2 weeks in a row, but now you got your grades together and now you get a chance to compete. That's a win, right? You've figured out what you needed to do and you took the steps and you got it together. That's a win. You tried a new event. You stepped in to fill in on a relay that we weren't expecting because somebody went missing for the 4x4, or like you fell down in the middle of your race and you picked, like, those are all wins, right? So, it's not, I think when we define winning in that way and we recognize all of those wins, as things that are desirable and that are worth celebrating, then I think that it comes back to like creating that environment, right, where everybody is celebrated and everybody is striving to do better than what they did before, and that ultimately makes our whole team better. And then at the same time, we do have those kids where it's like, okay, it's a different conversation, right? Or maybe it's not a different conversation, but it's an additional conversation on top of it, which is like, okay, hey, look, we have a legitimate chance to go out here and win a conference championship, right? So we need to make sure that we are warming up properly. We need to make sure that, you're going through your pre-race routine, you're visualizing, you're focusing, we're picking, we're encouraging our teammates, we're ready to step up in places if called upon as an alternate on a relay. Um, and we go out and we try and have our best day, or oh, you have a chance to medal at the state finals, right? And then it doesn't, if those things don't pan out, there's still a conversation to be had of like, okay, maybe you didn't make it on the podium, but like that doesn't mean that this was a failure. That doesn't mean that this was a waste, right? Let's think about everything that's led up to this moment, right? And so it's just a really great, I don't know, it's just a really great sport. So one last thing I'll say is like as far as the just kind of global team wide pursuit of excellence. So at the beginning of the season, on the first day of practice, when we kind of go through our expectations of kids, one of the things that I tell them is I say, we expect greatness from you. And I kind of let that hang for a second. And then I explain it's like, I don't mean that we expect great outcomes every time that you compete, because that's not realistic, right? You can't PR. Nobody PRs every single time that they compete. If that was true, the world record in the 100-meter dash would be like 7 seconds or something, right? Like, but what we do mean and what we do expect is that we expect you to give a great effort. We expect you to bring a great attitude. We expect you to be a great teammate. We expect you to have great attendance, be great students, make great choices, all those things, to kind of redefine what it means when we say we expect greatness from you. Like, we expect you to be pursuing greatness and pursuing excellence in everything that you do. And then, one kind of nice thing about that is that a lot of times when we do those things and we control those things that are within our control, we do see positive outcomes, right? We do see wins. And again, not necessarily gold medals and trophies, but we see wins, we see improvements, we see progressions, we see more people, more kids having the ability to sort of thrive in their event area. So I think if we can accurately identify which things are within our control, both in a team setting and in a life setting, right? And then do what we can to be great at those things, then we get a lot of positive outcomes. And if we've already defined those positive outcomes, like I said, as not just trophies and not just medals, then I think it starts to become pretty clear that you can actually cultivate wins for yourself, right? If you can define a win will be this, right? And it's tangible and feasible and realistic, then you can cultivate your own wins, right, all the time, which is in the type of person that you are and how you interact with others around you, and ultimately probably have a bit more rewarding experience as you move through the world.
No, absolutely. And you talk about how that pursuit of excellence and that expectation that everyone can pursue greatness, and it can be in just the quality of your effort. It can be in whether you did or did not improve. It can be in whether you did or did not take a risk or make a sacrifice to help your team, or it can be in those very, very pure meritocratic elements of did you win the race or did you hit this certain time? And when we talk about some of those things that we've just discussed, those also end up being certain elements that are discussed as part of the American dream, where if you work hard, if you have courage, if you take risks, if you have talent and creativity and integrity, these things will then pay off in material ways in your life and your career. And then as we look into kind of the bigger picture and we look at, the current Trump administration and the cabinet and how they approach their jobs and some of the ways that they actually are hostile to things that I would consider part of the American dream. And instead of those virtues we've just talked about, there are attacks on science, there are attacks on domain expertise, and there are attacks on ethical principles. And instead, what gets rewarded are blind loyalty, conspirational thinking, willingness to lie for power, cruelty, some of these things that we see and are bombarded with day in and day out. Meanwhile, in the sporting world, coaches and athletes, kind of like to stay apolitical and we want to stay in our lane. But to me, that is like the easiest opening to say, hey, this is where I'm going to speak up because I believe in meritocracy and this is not what it is. So as a coach, how do you see the role of other coaches in demanding that meritocracy be part of our American life? And as a mentor toward young people, how do you approach the idea that you're teaching these life skills that should translate to success in life, but someone could say, hey, actually, I see all these successful people right now who don't embody any of these qualities.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack in that
Oh, so
question.
there was like 7 questions in
So
there. I apologize.
yeah, no, I'll do the best I can. So I actually think that this ideal of the American dream, capital A, capital D, has always been a myth. And I don't mean that like in the colloquial sense of like that it's bullshit, but that like in a more literary sense where we define a myth as a story with cultural significance and staying power, right? It's a story that has been told so many times that it is a dream, right? It is a
Right.
fantasy. It's this thing that it's sort of amorphous, and we all know what it is, kind of, but like, is it a tangible, physical, like roadmap to follow? So, I mean, I think that there is a certain mythology, right, that surrounds this idea of the American dream. And I think that it has always been idealistic, and if it ever was really alive, I think it's kind of endangered right now. Um, but interestingly, though, I think that there are parallels between this myth or this story of the American dream and also like the stories that athletes have been told, right? That if they work harder than everybody else, they'll somehow become the best, right? And rise above their peers. And like in our sport and in a lot of sports, I think the truth is that an immensely talented athlete could roll off the couch and beat somebody who's busted their ass all season. That notion is kind of out the window. So I think we can keep the sports dream alive, though, if we retell that story with new definitions of success and winning, like we talked about earlier. So I think that maybe the sports dream is still alive if the American dream ever was in a tangible sense. But yeah, to the second part of your question, I think our current landscape is a dangerous one. The truth doesn't really seem to matter very much. Hostility is rewarded. The very notion of kindness has become to be seen as some kind of like woke ideology, or like, which is wild to me. It's like, no, it just literally means be nice to people, and like treat people the right way. So I don't know how that became politicized. A lot of black and white thinking, I think, in our government and media, and really even just the way that regular people think about issues that are actually pretty complex and pretty nuanced. And I think because that's easy, right? Like I've formed this opinion that I just formed right now, and I can stick to that. I don't need to like engage in ways that might be uncomfortable with an issue that actually is pretty complex or nuanced and has lots of different factors. So I think that's, I think that all of that is problematic. And I do think that we have a responsibility to push back against that. To me, the idea that teachers or coaches can ever be apolitical has always rubbed me as nonsense, because especially if you teach in a public school, because public schools are themselves political because they exist and operate because of public policy decisions, right? And we just saw the Supreme Court's going to allow Trump to continue to dismantle the Department of Education. So like my my school community, my workplace, my job, my role exists and operate because of political decisions, right? And so I don't think you can be apolitical when you work in that environment. Your job is inherently political. And I think, and in my school especially, in schools like mine, high poverty, minority, majority, under-resourced public school, we're confronted every day with the impact of those policies and hostile leadership in ways that, frankly, wealthy suburban white schools are not impacted. But I do think how we push back on those harmful ideologies and sort of the outward undermining of meritocratic values does matter. So I'm not exactly shy about like my politics or my values, but I'm also not here to like try and create clones of myself or try to convince kids to blindly trust and believe what I say. Just as you just said a minute ago, right? Like blind trust and blind allegiance is not something that we want. Those things without critical thinking is the opposite of what we want in society. So I think more than anything, I try to model the behaviors that I see as productive and almost sort of narrate at times, right? So like I actually think one example that I could point to is can be seen in one of the articles that I wrote on Simply Faster about our sort of unusual handoff that we do in the 4x2. So a lot of what I talked about in the articles that I wrote, I've also expressed to our athletes in different ways because it's a different audience. But like, you know, I saw a problem. I recognized that we had the potential to do better. I sought out the advice of people who I thought might have ideas or solutions to address the problem that I felt like we were having. We experimented with that solution. We found positive results, and we've continued to sort of tweak it and modify how we execute that particular strategy, because it's not like, okay, I found the answer one time and that's how we're going to do it forever, right? Nothing's ever set in stone. And I don't believe that I've found the one true answer in a sort of black and white world here. So I've told our kids how we came to that process, right? Or how we came through that process to get where we are now. And if we are going to make a change, you know, sort of why and where I got this idea from, or who I talked to, or why I think based on, you know, the speed of this kid and the speed of this kid, why I think this is going to work better or whatever. I think another example is like how I introduce training concepts to kids. So like before we do our first lactate workout of the year, for example, I take the time to explain the energy systems to our team and explain why they're about to feel the way that they're about to feel when they finish that workout, and explain how it's going to benefit them. And do I like necessarily think that they're going to understand every aspect of that explanation the first time through, or even the second time through, or the third time through? Because I do then sort of review it each time we do a workout like that. No, but I think what I'm demonstrating to them is that what we're doing has been thought through. It's been informed by real science. It has a specific purpose. It's not just willy-nilly or on a whim, right? Another thing is this season we started doing a lot more of like kind of the speed power stuff early in the season that looks a lot like, you know, sort of Tony Wells stuff, which I actually got from like Carol Smith Gilbert at Georgia and Yolanda Johnson at Michigan State. And so do I expect that the kids are going to know any of those names? No, not necessarily. But what I want them to see is that learning from experts and other successful coaches is something that I do. So maybe they will internalize the idea that if they want to learn about something, then they should seek someone out who knows more than they do or knows something different than they do. Because I think it's dangerous to believe that we have all the answers, and that our view is the right one and every other view is the wrong one, and that we shouldn't be trying to listen to other voices to see what we can learn. So I think, you know, it just, for me, I mean, yes, there are definitely times and things that I have, you know, sort of vocally spoken out against. But I think more than anything, if I can find ways to model those values and sort of also narrate that process out loud, then maybe they'll see like an adult who has gone through a thought process, right? Or who has recognized that they didn't know something and who saw the value in finding somebody who did, and having a conversation. And hopefully some of that becomes internalized somewhere along the way.
No, absolutely. That's fantastic. And in that, you mentioned one of the, true unfairnesses of sport is that somebody who chose their parents wisely may be able to roll out of bed and be a better athlete than somebody who does everything they possibly can that their coaches tell them, and they are the hardest worker, and still they're not going to have the same success as somebody who just has certain natural physical talents and abilities. But also earlier you mentioned that one of your most important values is that there should be a equity of access, and you value inclusiveness, and those are really, really important qualities when it comes to youth sports and getting kids involved in youth sports. Is there should be that equity of access and there should be that inclusive quality. But we've seen in our lifetimes this change to the pay to play model, where suddenly things like, can you pay a $2,500 to $3,500 to $4,500 yearly registration fee for a team, is now maybe more important than how athletic you are? And do you have a parent with the job flexibility to drive you to practices all over the city, may be more important than your coachability? And that element of youth sports has kind of taken over for some of the access to it. So as a teacher, as a coach, as a parent, how have you seen that shift take place over our lifetimes? And do you have any ideas for how to make that process of youth sports a little bit more accessible and more inclusive?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think it's a phenomenon that is really harmful to youth athletes. But one that has been sold to parents as something that is not only not harmful, but actually beneficial, right? And I do mean sold, because the pay to play club model is a business, and there are people making money off of that and off of parents, kind of in the name of a myth that they already believe, right? So kind of leveraging that myth, right? This, you know, focus, work harder than everybody else, do more, and your kid will be the best. And parents, I think, are eager to fork over money if it means that they can give their kid they can say or feel like they gave their kid every opportunity to be successful. But I think it's at the expense of kids' overall well-being, and long-term athletic development, because I think another like result of that is that we do see a lot of kids who play one sport all year, right? And they either they burn out, they are at a higher risk of overuse injury, right? And all these kind of other things that come along with that. And I think also that as the pay to play model continues to expand, it doesn't just expand alongside the previously existing model. It sort of encroaches on the previously existing model, and we see a reduction in number of sort of high quality youth sport programs that are either free or very affordable. And a lot of families just can't afford it. I think that that's really magnified in poor communities, especially, which means now we're not just talking about like one kid in the neighborhood who can't be on the team that his buddies are on, but we're talking about entire communities missing out on something that the kids in the next town over have no barriers to entry for. And I think that that's a real shame. A few years ago, we had a bunch of our athletes qualify for New Balance Nationals in Philadelphia. And when I first sent out the interest forms and the permission slips and stuff, I got crickets. And the kids told me that they wanted to go, but that their families couldn't afford for them to make the trip. So I was like, I felt like that really sucks. I was wondering like how many other deserving athletes are sitting home during these events because they can't afford to attend, right? And I'm not bashing like New Balance Nationals outdoor meet because I think it's a great event. I'm just bothered by the fact that we've sort of normalized limiting opportunities to compete at elite levels based not on merit and deservingness of that opportunity, but on money, right? So we started fundraising like crazy, and so that no kid at our school who qualified to be there would have to sit home because of money, right? There may be other reasons, right? Like, oh, well, we have a wedding that weekend or whatever, but like, I didn't want money to be the thing where it's like, well, I've qualified for this great event, but I can't go because my family can't afford it. I actually think as far as like ideas, I don't know, maybe that's above my pay grade, I don't know, but I actually think the solution to the problem isn't one that needs to be invented. I think we just need to take a look at the types of programs that used to exist 10, 20 years ago, and then ask some questions about how do we stray so far from those models and figure out ways to put them back into place in ways that are attractive to families. I think schools can play a big part in this, especially public schools, since public schools are often sort of important pillars in a community. But I also hesitate to say that because I don't think sometimes we ask the public school to be everything and do everything and fill in the gaps that are missing in the community and to do more and more with less and less. So I think that's tricky. But I mean, I remember a program that I did as a kid in my hometown. It was called Summer Hoops, and it was put on by the public school system, and it was 2 mornings a week during the summer for an hour and a half, something like that. It was housed at the gyms of the local elementary schools. So whatever neighborhood you lived in, like there was going to be a summer hoops program just a few minutes away, probably at the elementary school that you attended. It was coached by athletes from the high schools, and they were coaching out of a curriculum book essentially that was put together by the high school coaches. And I don't know that it was necessary. Neither of our high school basketball teams ever got so good that I think you could ever say that it became a feeder program. But I mean, it did keep a lot of kids interested in the sport of basketball, and it did give a lot of kids something to do 2 mornings a week. And I think it cost like $20 for the whole summer, which was basically covered like the t-shirt that we got. And literally hundreds of kids participated in this program for years. And eventually I even ended up coaching it once I became a high school basketball player at my high school. So I think it's really a travesty that programs like that seem to have dried up and been replaced by things that, well, I mean, I'm sending my son to a basketball camp in a week or two here, and it's 4 days for 3 hours a day, and it's like $300 for the week, and it's like that's super cost prohibitive, especially when you compare it to $20 for the whole summer for 2 mornings a week. Like, it just makes it really hard, and unfortunately it means that a lot of kids aren't able to access sport if their parents' paycheck isn't big enough. So I think we can learn from the existing models, or the pre-existing models that have sort of been swallowed up, and see if we can find a way to extricate them.
Yeah, no, one of the driving forces of pre-existing models of sport was the spirit of volunteerism. And as you mentioned, they're driven by coaches who are either, recently having played, or parents who are invested in teaching their kids and their kids' friends. And all of that volunteerism is the thing that allows for a less cost prohibitive model. And over the last 20 to 25 years having been involved in youth sports, one of the things that happened in tandem with the pay-to-play model was in the recreational models, it got harder and harder and harder to get volunteers as that became less part of society. People were just less interested in volunteering to do something and more willing to just, well, what if I just, write the check instead?
Yeah.
And then that cuts people out. And as we're kind of talking about, changes over time and talking about meritocracy and talking about equity of access, one of the biggest changes that we've seen in the last couple of years has been the incredible explosion of artificial intelligence. And it is something that actually does have some equity of access, yet there are some big downsides to that. So as a teacher, how do you manage the explosion of AI tools in the classroom? And then as a coach, how do you balance, hey, there are some tools that I think are useful for me, and also I'm pursuing this personal process of excellence and being my own coach. How do I not buy into some of the easier hacks and easier ways to do so just using AI?
Yeah, I'm so sick of ChatGPT already. Like, I realize that makes me sound like curmudgeonly or like tech averse or whatever, and I'm not. I mean, or at least I'm not tech averse. I might be curmudgeonly. I've definitely, like, I've used ChatGPT and other Gen AI tools to try to streamline some parts of like administrative work of teaching and those kinds of things. So I mean, I think obviously, right, there's value to be found in these tools, and probably certainly there are people out there who are leveraging them much more than I am. But as a teacher in the classroom, what I'm seeing more and more is that sort of turning to AI is a first instinct rather than a tool that can be helpful once you've already engaged your own brain, right? Like, I've tried nothing. I'm all out of ideas. Let me ask ChatGPT, right? So like that first step is really crucial. That one where you use your own brain first, and then you try to think through it. And we're just like, I don't know if it's a resilience thing or if it's an attention span thing, or if kids are just so accustomed to be able to being able to like find an answer just to a question so quickly that they don't want to go through that process of like, I don't know, it's almost like anxiety inducing. I don't know, they don't, and again, here I am sounding curmudgeonly, but like kids these days, it just seems like a lot of them don't want to wrestle with hard questions or concepts on their own. And it's also not, in my view, it's not a coincidence that my best students are the ones who are willing to do that, even when that process is messy, right? Because that is where learning happens, right? Is like going through the sort of the messy thought process of trying to figure something out and bring some sense of organization to those ideas and form a coherent thought or response. But it is, and we talked about this when we were texting back and forth the other day, like, it's not easy. If it was easy, I would write way more articles than I have written, right? It's hard and it's lengthy and it is a sometimes mess of a process, but it's also rewarding when you come out on the other side of it. So anyway, I think another potential problem that I see is that I think that AI has the potential to discourage that process, and where we seek out experts or individuals who may know more about something that we do, right, can discourage that same kind of process that I talked about earlier. And also maybe to, I don't know, also maybe to like cause people to devalue others' expertise, right? Because like when I think about what I know about coaching, or what I believe, I guess, about coaching, because I don't think there's a lot that I don't know, and but everything that I know comes from conversations that I've had with others, right? And questions that I've asked people, and things I've learned from colleagues, and articles I've read, and clinics I've attended, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? It wasn't because I sat down or like pulled my phone out and like opened up ChatGPT and was like, what is the best way to coach track? You know, like that's just not how it works. So but I think that there is also a danger, right, in like the potential for people who are not experts to believe that they are, or to believe that expertise doesn't really matter because the robot can just summarize the whole internet for me real quick. So why do I need to seek out experts? And I think if you do that often enough, you start to think that you actually know things, which you don't necessarily know, but like that's a whole other issue. There's a lot of experts on social media too, right? Who speak as if they're experts, but they just really have opinions and a keyboard. But I think that, you know, real expertise doesn't come from reading the answer, right? It comes from having gone through the pursuit and the process of finding the answer. And also sometimes it comes from realizing that you don't know the answer and that you have more questions. And sometimes it comes from knowing that there isn't one answer and that things are complex and nuanced and not black and white. But I know for sure that it's not like wisdom or expertise is not in the Google AI summary. So I just think we can learn more from other people that we can from technology sometimes. But funny, kind of a funny story. If it's like what an LOL sob type story, sort of. We had a new athlete transfer to our school this year. Great kid. He ended up being a really important part of our team. 400 runner primarily, but he transferred into our school this year, and he knew some of the kids at our school already, and you know, they introduced him to me right away because he knew his track kid, and he had a lot of questions about track, which I loved. I love it when kids ask questions, which is maybe another thing that comes back to that idea of like modeling the behaviors or celebrating the behaviors we want to see. Like I tell kids, if there's something you don't understand or you're not sure why we're doing something, as long as you're like polite about asking your question, it's not disrespectful to ask like why we're doing a thing that we're doing. And you know, there's this like trust the process, and that I say all the time, like I'm not going to ask you to trust a process that you don't understand. So please ask me. I'll first try to explain to you what we're doing and why we're doing. If you're not sure about something, ask me. We'll talk through it. Because trust comes from understanding, right? But anyway, so he was asking me a lot of questions, and I could tell he was like unsure about some of the stuff that I was telling him about like speed development and power development, and that how we train athletes at our school was probably a lot different than how he had been trained at his previous school. And one day he came by my classroom during his lunch, and he said, you know, I was thinking about what you said, or what you've been telling me about speed training, and I believe you. And I said, all right, great. Why is that? He said, well, because, you know, I asked ChatGPT what's the best way to get faster, and it said a lot of the same things that you were saying. And like ultimately, you know, I guess he bought in, but I remember feeling just so annoyed at how slow he was to trust me as a real person with lots of experience and lots of trial and error and lessons learned and an evolution as a coach, but was immediately persuaded by what the AI bot told him. So, I mean, I guess whatever, but wild times.
Yeah. No, so that leads perfectly into my next question, because you talk about knowledge and expertise being based in the process of finding an answer, not just getting an answer. And however, there are just so many ways that you can take that shortcut to the answer, and so many people believe that answer so inherently just because it came so fast.
Yeah.
And then the conundrum with that is, if you get so used to going directly to the answer, that shortcut makes it very, very hard for you to ever develop the skills to truly find those right answers on your own. And those critical thinking abilities don't develop, or they atrophy. And so in the current media environment, we see a lot of either AI-driven fakes. We see propaganda that's manipulated specifically to impact certain behaviors, and people will need more than ever those critical thinking abilities to say, no, this isn't actually real, or no, this thing only takes this little element of the truth, but I'm going to do the extra work to find this, and this. So that's not actually, that thing that I saw was meant to make me feel this way, but it's not really true. So within the current algorithms and online media environment, and dealing with young athletes who you're trying to develop healthy habits in, do you talk at all about having a healthy media diet? And do you talk at all about how to use critical thinking skills in the current online atmosphere?
Yeah, I mean, this is super hard. And I don't know that I have a good answer or a good solution. Yeah, I mean, I do know that the smartphone is just a dopamine factory, and for lots of people, it's nearly impossible to put it down, and especially for kids whose brains are not fully developed. I think with athletes, I've definitely spent more time talking about, to use your phrase, like media diet, right? Media consumption. From a physical and mental health perspective, too much screen time is bad. It makes it hard to sleep. All the other sort of harmful impacts of just too much smartphone use in general. And sometimes conversations will come up where a kid will say something like, "Hey, I saw this guy on TikTok and he said I should change my blocks and set them up like this instead." Which then that opens the door to a conversation about authority, right? Who was this person? What's their background? Why did they say doing it this way was going to be better for you? Well, what is it about your current block setup that makes you feel like you need to change it? What problem are you trying to solve? Is there even actually a problem, or did you just see a video that had it made the lights go off in your hand, like ding, 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 and now you feel like you want to do something about it, things like that, to make them, to sort of encourage them to question the material or the content that they've consumed. I guess I'm questioning them, but they can't, if they try to pull out their phone and chat GPT the answer to the question that I just asked them, then we're not going to get anywhere, and that's not going to happen. So I don't know. In the classroom, I think as a teacher, the conversations about thinking critically about what we're consuming online come a bit more naturally, especially in the English classes that I teach. Again, kind of questions like, who's this person, right? Who's the author? Who's the speaker here? What is the message that they're trying to convey? And for what purpose, right? What are they hoping to accomplish? How are they hoping that their audience is going to respond? Who is their audience? Are you their target audience, or is somebody else their target audience? You're viewing it, but are you the person they had in mind when they created that content? What are their claims? What claims are they making? What evidence do they offer to support those claims? What other methods of persuasion are they using? Are those valid? Do you notice any logical fallacies or gaps? And those conversations, I think, are pretty automatic almost in. So I teach, one of the classes I teach is AP, language and composition, which is very it's super nonfiction driven, and it's super rhetorical analysis focused. So like those are questions that we ask all the time of every text that we read. I guess, try to cross our fingers and hope again that some of those questioning strategies carry over outside the classroom into the other types of media that they consume. I do like to share with my students that media bias chart that's put out every year. I don't know if I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or not. So it's put out by a group, Ad Fontes Media or something like that, and basically it's I'm not sure which way this is going to show up on the camera. It's a chart that on the y-axis is just factual, objective news reporting, and at the bottom is like fabricated nonsense, and then like in the middle is sort of like largely opinion based, and then all the way up and down, and then the x-axis is right leaning and left leaning, and so near the top of your near the top center are your news outlets that I'm sure are thinking of, where it's like, if I just want to know what happened, I'm just going to go here. Mm-hmm. Right. If I just want to know, what was the policy, what was the new law that was just passed? What was the Supreme Court ruling? And I don't want anybody's opinion about what it was. Right. And then it trickles all the way down, and I have that. And one of the things that, anytime we read an article, we read something from the Washington Post in class, and I was like, all right, so let's see, where does this fit? Okay, Washington Post is generally considered to be pretty reliable in terms of not making stuff up, right? So it's pretty high. It's not, it's not the BBC, but it's pretty high up there, but it is slightly left-leaning, right? Or has historically been slightly left-leaning. So who do they probably think their readership is, right? And what sorts of topics do they probably cover on their editorial board, right? And things like that, so. But I think I put it up there really big, and sometimes they see things like, oh man, Fox News, look where that is. That's or and that's. But also, I think it's that's also not really the way that kids consume news media either. Right. So TikTok's not on there, right? But I also think though that they are indirectly consuming that media, because sometimes it's a regurgitated clip that came from an interview that was on this particular channel or whatever, but it's just been condensed into 160 characters or a 20-second video, and we just are doom scrolling it endlessly. But so I don't know. I used to feel like that was a more useful tool when I felt like kids were more familiar with those types of news media and things like that. But I still think a valuable thing for people to be aware of, that not every purported news website is created equally, right? And not every outlet has the same political leanings, and some are far more extreme than others, and some are far more concerned on the facts than they are than others are, and those kinds of things. But anyway, I think that's a bit of a digression, but I just think, honestly, probably the best advice I could give any kid would be to just throw your phone into the ocean and stay off social media forever. But I think that might be a little bit of a hard sell. So, yeah, I don't know, man. It's tough out there.
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to get anyone to throw their phones into the ocean, but at least if you can talk them into, putting it away for a while and going for a walk in nature, you've made some progress there. And in that last answer, you talk about the importance of questioning strategies. And previously, you talked a little bit about how the American dream was probably more of a myth repeated over time than something that was ever actually truly concrete. And as we wrap up each of these interviews, I usually ask the guests if they have some sort of definition of patriotism. And I've talked to Tony Holler and Eric Becker, and their definitions of patriotism lended towards good people working towards a collective good. Scott Charland had a slightly different view that patriotism was being willing to dissent and hold the country to the values that he expects. I just had an interview with Coach Julio Salado, who had a definition I liked a lot, and he said that patriotism wasn't a destination that you ever get to with a flag at it. It was just a process of how you live your life every single day. And within these different definitions of patriotism and within these ways of questioning how we know what we know, how would you personally try to define patriotism, and do you see any path towards a shared vision of that across the United States?
So I think what I appreciate about this question is that you seem to sort of be attempting to reclaim the notion of patriotism here, because I think a lot of times when people talk about patriotism, what they're actually talking about is nationalism. Mm-hmm. And if we really want to get into the thick of it, I think what most people think of as patriotism is actually white Christian nationalism. And so in this country, it feels to me like the dictionary definition of the word doesn't even really matter a lot. Language evolves and usage dictates meaning. So as much as we may not want patriotism and nationalism to be one and the same, they effectively are as it stands right now. So all that is to say, like, I think it's an honorable pursuit to sort of delineate and reclaim the idea of patriotism, but it's not really a pursuit I'm actually personally very interested in, which is maybe going to ruffle some feathers. But like, my view is that patriotism in this country is largely performative, and is rarely rooted in real action. Even by its actual definition of like devotion and vigorous support for one's country, like that's still not an idea I personally can really get behind, which again might piss some people off, but I don't personally feel devotion or vigorous support to this country, the country, right? I can't imagine pledging allegiance to a flag. I don't believe we live in the land of the free. I think a country is arbitrary. I think borders change. I think governments crumble. And I don't personally feel that a country is a worthwhile thing to devote oneself to. But before like anybody listening to this wants to like throw me in front of the firing squad, I'll offer a couple things. One is that I think it's probably a more worthwhile pursuit to replace patriotism with more of a humanism, recognizing the value and dignity of every person, advocating for social justice, aiming to create an environment that allows all people to thrive and reach their fullest potential, and recognizing that we're all moving through this world together and that the world is a better place when we're all doing better. The other is that, I maybe could be convinced of the ideal of patriotism, but only if we can define country not as some star-spangled entity that we are supposed to pledge our allegiance to, but as a massive community, right? To come back to the ideas that I was kind of sharing at the beginning, right? If we can apply those same ideals that I talked about earlier about community building, about lifting others up, about removing barriers to access, about creating a national environment in which all members of the national community are invited to participate and allowed to thrive, then I think patriotism could be a worthy ideal in that circumstance. But unfortunately, I feel like too much damage has been done to the phrase or to the word, and that white Christian nationalism has sort of exterminated that idea or that version of patriotism. So I guess that sort of brings me back to the idea that I don't know if we can revive it or reclaim it, but maybe that we need to just replace it with something better. And maybe something that's so much better that we don't even need it.
No, I like that. And sometimes you ask a question because you know the answer and you're hoping to get an answer that confirms it. I ask the question because I haven't the slightest idea. And I do like where you're getting to with the humanism versus the nationalism part of that, because I'm probably in the exact same boat with you, where if I'm in a room with somebody or a group of people and there happens to be somebody from Canada and somebody from Finland and somebody from Japan and somebody from Mexico and somebody from the United States, I don't feel a special affinity for the person from the United States over the person or the people from those other countries that supersedes their humanism. It's, their values and who they are, that's going to form the connections for me versus, well, we both happen to we pay taxes to the same federal government.
Right.
I really care less about that. And so, trying to see where you can kind of reclaim those principles and some of those ideas is something where I'm sort of interested in getting at. But again, I that's the question that I ask that I really don't know either. So.
And it sounds a bit like some of the answers that you mentioned other people have shared are kind of getting at some of the same ideas that I just shared, but I guess I'm maybe I just think maybe we just throw the whole word away and replace it with something else, because it's sort of like not to trivialize this question, but it's sort of like the word literally in our lexicon, right? When people say the word literally, they don't mean literally. They mean figuratively.
Right.
So the word, it doesn't even matter what the dictionary definition of that word is anymore. It's gone. It's not how people use it. The definition, that what it says in the book doesn't matter. So I think in some ways patriotism is kind of the same, right? Like that definition that Webster has is gone. It's not what people mean when they use that word, and it's not what we think of when that word comes up. So I think maybe we just need a better thing to be devoted to. And I think, maybe that's the other people around us.
No, absolutely. And things you've talked about, language evolves, people evolves, and wisdom and knowledge come from the process of looking for an answer more so than being given an answer. So I think through the course of this conversation, hopefully we've spent some time trying to find some answers and hopefully sharing some insight that ultimately our listeners will find interesting. And Coach Tyler, thank you so much for your time today and your willingness to share your thoughts and your insight. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So I will